Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar today to learn more about the New Jersey Pay It Forward program and how your organization can be a part of this exciting new initiative. The New Jersey Pay It Forward program is an innovative new career training fund that will provide interest and fee-free loans to low-income New Jersey career seekers, allowing them to participate in approved education and training programs, in addition to receiving a living stipend that will not have to be repaid. I'm thrilled to see so many high-quality education and training providers who are interested in learning more about New Jersey Pay It Forward. This program can be an important new tool for you to better attract, enroll, and retain traditionally underserved students. The Murphy administration is committed to closing equity gaps and ensuring that all students, regardless of life circumstance, can attain a high-quality degree or credential that prepares them for success. In particular, I'm excited about the ways in which New Jersey Pay It Forward can support training and education programs at our state's higher education institutions. We expect this program will fill funding gaps for students in need, provide wraparound supports to increase student success, and scaling high-quality education and training programs to serve a larger number of students. New Jersey is leading the nation in launching this new fund, and I'm looking forward to the many benefits it will bring to our state's higher education system.
Thank you, Dr. Bridges, for that inspiring welcome. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and we are so delighted to see how many training providers have joined us to learn more about the New Jersey Pay It Forward program. The engagement of high-quality training and education providers is the single most essential element for the success of this first-in-the-nation program. So again, thank you all for being here. My name is Meredith Siegel, and I'm joining you from Social Finance. We are a national, nonprofit impact advisory firm that was procured by the state of New Jersey as the program manager for the New Jersey Pay It Forward program. I'm just going to start by walking through our agenda for today. I will begin by talking about the history and mission of the Pay It Forward program, as well as the industries and occupations that we're targeting. I'll then pass the mic to my colleague, Erin Thornton, to talk in detail about the training provider selection process for this first round of the Pay It Forward program, as well as our plans for collaborating with our first group of selected providers. We anticipate that you all will have quite a few questions, and we've allocated significant time at the end to address questions. Please feel free to input your questions in the chat as they arise, and we will address them at the conclusion of today's session. We will also send out an email to all participants containing the slides and the questions and answers from today. If you did not previously register for the webinar, please take a moment to register now so that we will be able to stay in touch with you. We will post in the chat the link for registration. Without further ado, let's jump into today's content. As most of you know, I believe, in June of this year, Governor Murphy announced the creation of the Pay It Forward program. And since then, Social Finance has had the honor of collaborating with public and private leaders across the state to design and launch the program. I have to say that we are incredibly fortunate to have partners who are so committed to student outcomes, so dedicated and so thoughtful as the partners that we've had the honor of working with here in New Jersey. Before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of the Office of the Governor, the Higher Education Student Assistance Authority, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, the Office of the Secretary of Higher Education, the Department of Labor, the Department of Banking, and the Division of Consumer Affairs for bringing us where we are today. I'd also like to acknowledge the critical role of a new entity, the CEO Council, which is comprised of 8 of New Jersey's leading employers: BD, Johnson & Johnson, Prudential, Campbell, Merck, PSEG, RWJ Barnabas Health, and Verizon. These companies have collectively pledged to hire 30,000 low-income New Jerseyans over the coming decade, and they are also providing critical support to this program, both through funding and through the insights they're able to offer us into their respective industries, their anticipated hiring needs, and the training pipeline within the state of New Jersey. We are deeply grateful to both our public and our private sector partners. As Secretary Bridges referenced, New Jersey is the first state in the nation to launch something like this. This is a trial, this is a very exciting pilot, of a Pay It Forward fund. Our team at Social Finance is honored to be part of this, and we cannot say enough about the leadership of the public and private sector entities from the state of New Jersey. The mission and mandate of the Pay It Forward program is to provide low-income individuals in New Jersey access to training opportunities that would otherwise be unattainable due to limited financial resources. We are going to walk through the vision for this program as well as how we imagine the program functioning. As you will see, the program is aiming to address a set of needs that we have heard exist within the state of New Jersey. Thank you for posting the governor's press release about the Pay It Forward program. For those of you looking for more context and background, that link is available in the chat. The program is designed to address a set of needs that have been identified by our public and private sector partners. Specifically, we recognize that there are quite a few individuals within the state of New Jersey who are unable to access high-quality training programs due to funding gaps. Even though the state of New Jersey has a very robust system of grants and other programs to help with funding higher education and training, there exists significant ongoing gaps. This program is designed to complement those existing funding sources in order to pay tuition, fees, materials, and other costs of attending. The program is also going to offer living stipends and wraparound supports in recognition of the fact that oftentimes low-income individuals are unable to perform to their full potential due to the barriers they face outside of the classroom. The Pay It Forward structure is designed to be extremely friendly to students and to training providers so that we can serve multiple cohorts of students over time. From the training provider perspective, providers will receive the usual tuition paid upfront. From the student perspective, there will be no interest, no fees, and the student obligation to repay will be time limited and conditional upon income. Students who do not earn income over the minimum income threshold during the repayment period will have their loans forgiven. In this way, we aim to both maximize the number of students that we're able to serve with the funds at our disposal, and we aim to ensure that students have full protection against downside risk. The Pay It Forward program will serve low-income and otherwise disadvantaged students throughout the state of New Jersey. We've heard time and again from employers on our CEO Council and beyond that there is a desire to increase equity in terms of gender, in terms of race, and in terms of individuals who come from traditionally disadvantaged backgrounds. One of the biggest barriers they face is finding individuals who have the necessary training and education to fill their open jobs. Through the Pay It Forward program, we believe that we can offer a pathway for such individuals to transition from their current employment into career track jobs that pay family-sustaining wages and address economic needs in the state of New Jersey. Right now, we're going to put up the first of several poll questions, and we encourage you to take a moment to address this question. We'll give everyone about 2 minutes to address this, and then we will look forward to seeing the responses. This is really fun for us to get this data in real time because we've been hypothesizing internally for quite a while surrounding what barriers training providers are facing, and it is really cool to get to see what you all have to say. Based upon the results to date, it looks like almost 90% of you are seeing challenges with regard to affordability. We hope the Pay It Forward program will address those. We also see that inability to take time away from paid work is a significant challenge. That is the objective of the living stipend, to be able to reduce the number of hours that students need to work in order to support their families while they're pursuing training. We also see that a number of you have indicated that lack of childcare, lack of housing stability, transportation, and need for remedial education are also challenges for students. As we work with our selected training providers, we will be collaborating surrounding the development of wraparound services to help combat these challenges and help students succeed to the best of their ability. We will continue. So here we're just going to walk through a little bit more the mechanics of the Payette Forward program. As we've mentioned before, this is fairly unprecedented, and we know that it's a little bit of a funky structure, so we want to take the time to be able to explain exactly how we see this working. The goal here at a high level is to enable our selected training providers to serve more low-income students and students who would otherwise be unable to access your program. Everything about this program is designed to maximize access while minimizing risk for students. As a training provider, this program offers you the opportunity to expand your enrollment to serve more students, and specifically to serve students who otherwise might not have access to your program through existing funding mechanisms. What this cycle outlines is the mechanism of the Pay It Forward recycling. So what you'll see here is in the top box, you see students who receive no interest, no fee loans. That means that once a student has applied to your program, been accepted to your program, and then applied for funding through the Pay It Forward program, been accepted, you as a training provider will receive upfront payment for the portion of the cost of attending that Pay It Forward will cover for that student. The student then participates in the training program, and during that time will have access to the living stipend and to the wraparound supports, as we will discuss in greater detail as we go through this presentation. Following the completion of training, with support from your institution, with support from other resources leveraged by Pay It Forward, and with the engagement of the CEO Council companies, students will have support in transitioning into a new occupation, the occupation for which they've completed the training program. Assuming that students successfully complete their programs and obtain employment with wages high enough to sustain a family in the state of New Jersey, they will then repay their loan, again with no interest or fees, to the Pay It Forward fund, and that capital will then be used to fund future loans to additional low-income students. This fund is not intended to exist in perpetuity, because we recognize that, of course, we will be making grants and not all the money that goes out will come back in, but the Pay It Forward mechanism will allow this fund to go much further than it would if it were exclusively being dispersed through grants. Again, as we've noted before, if students do not achieve the desired outcomes, for example, they don't complete the training program, or they don't end up in a job that pays family sustaining wages, then they do not have an obligation to repay their loan from the Pay It Forward fund. In that way, they will have complete loan forgiveness, and students are protected against downside risk. Once again, I see some questions are coming in the chat, and as I referenced, we will come to all of those in the end. So we appreciate your putting those in as they come up, and we'll come to those in the end. Once again, I just want to highlight that for training providers, we think that this can be a key marketing mechanism for you to attract, enroll, and retain students by offering this additional financing option to close gaps that may exist within your current set of financing options. I'm going to speak briefly now to the set of occupations that we're focusing on. Per our mandate from the Governor's Office and from our CEO Council companies, we're initially focusing on health, IT, and clean energy industries. These are three industries that we anticipate having high demand in the state of New Jersey over the course of the next decade, and we're excited to be able to contribute to training programs in health, IT, and clean energy. Within those industries, we've been analyzing potential occupations, and we've been looking for occupations that meet a very specific set of criteria. First, occupations must have an average starting salary of over $45,000. This is probably the toughest bar to hit and the place where we see the most interested occupations falling off the list. We are really committed to this salary in order to ensure that occupations truly offer a pathway to economic mobility for participants. We also are seeking occupations that offer strong prospects for career advancement without the need for significant additional degrees or education in order to keep on growing. We generally prefer programs that don't require a bachelor's degree, or occupations that don't require a bachelor's degree, though we've considered some that require a bachelor's as long as a master's is not required. Finally, we're focusing only on occupations that have a strong labor market outlook. The list that you see on your screen now is a preliminary list of such occupations. It is not intended to be all-inclusive, and we're very open to considering other occupations that meet the criteria that I've outlined. For those of you who are familiar with the New Jersey in-demand occupation list, you'll note that there's some overlap with that list, but that there are also quite a few occupations that are not on the current in-demand occupation list, largely because they don't meet the current volume threshold to be eligible for that list. This means that there are programs for which ITAs cannot be used that would be eligible for the Payette Forward program. So again, if you have an occupation for which you're preparing students that falls within the salary threshold and the other criteria that we've explained that is in the health, IT, or clean energy domain, we'd be more than happy to talk with you further about that program and to consider it for participation within the Payette Forward program. So with that said, that covers our vision and our mission. I hope that it is inspiring to all of you to want to participate in this program. And now Erin is going to go through the details of how we will be selecting our first round of providers.
Thank you, Meredith. So as Meredith mentioned, I'll start with a bit of detail on the training provider selection process, and then briefly touch on the sort of ongoing collaboration between training providers and social finance that we're envisioning over the life of the Pay It Forward program. So starting with the training provider selection process, I wanted to highlight some of the qualities or attributes in training providers that we'll be looking at as we assess training providers that are a good fit for the program. And finding and collaborating with training providers who excel in serving low-income or traditionally underserved students is key to the success of this program. So we're looking to partner with 3 to 5 institutions who will then be able to offer qualifying students the option to receive funding via New Jersey Pay It Forward. There are some key attributes we'll be looking for, and the first is having 1 or more short-term training programs that prepare students for careers in health, IT, or clean energy. With regards to length of training, our sweet spot is training programs that last somewhere between 3 and 6 months, but we're open to considering a longer or shorter programs, especially if they have compelling impact data. The second attribute we're looking for is training providers that have a data-backed track record of strong student outcomes and capacity to collect and share data on students' demographics and outcomes on an ongoing basis. Related to this, we're particularly looking for training providers with experience successfully serving low-income students. And then the final 2 qualities we're looking for are capacity to accommodate increased student enrollment or additional demand for training programs, and a demonstrated need for a new student-friendly financing option for low-income students. The final key criteria that I'd like to mention is that for the first round of the New Jersey Pay It Forward program, and again, I'll reiterate that we're envisioning multiple rounds of training through the program. But for the first round, training providers must have at least one of their programs already included on the New Jersey eligible training provider list. So if your institution doesn't yet have any programs on the Etpl, you could certainly be considered for future cohorts, but for this first round, we are looking for training providers who have 1 or more programs on Etpl in New Jersey. On the next slide, we'll give a high-level overview of the entire training provider selection process phase, and next we will move into stage 1 of our due diligence process. So the next step for interested training providers to indicate that they would like their programs to be considered for NJ Pay It Forward is to submit data about your student demographics and outcomes on our basic data form. And we'll discuss this in more detail on the next slide, as well as share the form with you. We'll use this information on student outcomes and demographics from the basic data form to select a smaller group of training providers to participate in stage 2 of our due diligence process. And then our target enrollment launch date is February of 2022 for the first round of students. We do anticipate multiple rounds of training, so training providers who aren't selected for inclusion in the first round could still be selected to participate in future rounds of the program. So on the next slide, we'll dive a bit deeper on the due diligence process for training providers. So beginning with stage 1 of our diligence process, to help us better understand your students' achievements and backgrounds, we're asking training providers to complete a basic data form, which asks for any data you might have on completion rates, placement rates, starting salaries, and student demographics from your training programs. I will share this data form in the Zoom chat, and it is also going to be sent to you by email tomorrow as well. The more data that you can submit, the easier it will be for us to assess if your program is a good fit for New Jersey Payette Forward. But all of the questions are optional. So if there's any information that you don't have on hand at the moment, we'd still encourage you to submit whatever you can in the basic data form. That way we know that you're interested in the program. And I do want to thank all of you who have already submitted the basic data form as well. So you'll see it's up and running now, and we're ready to take submissions whenever people have the ability to provide that information. Once we've gathered outcomes data from interested providers, we'll then select programs with the greatest student success rates for a deeper stage 2 diligence process, including gathering information on providers' financial health and diving deeper into program specifics via informational interviews with key staff. So lastly, I will talk a little bit about the ongoing collaboration during the life of the New Jersey Payette Forward program. So on this next slide, we have a bit of information about the kind of data sharing that we're envisioning during the program. So we would be looking to training providers to collect student outcomes data on an ongoing basis and share it with social finance, including some of the indicators that we have here on the left side of the screen. And then on our side, we would be gathering outcomes and demographics data from both the state of New Jersey, training providers, and our loan servicing partner, and returning some analyses, sharing it back with training providers. This might include comparisons of pre-program and post-program earnings data, analyses of student outcomes by demographic group, and data on supportive services utilization rates. And we're envisioning this as something that could be useful to training providers to help them better understand their program's strengths and areas for development. So with that, I think we can move into answering some of the great questions I've seen popping up in the chat. But before we do, I just want to highlight again the next steps. So the first would be to complete the basic data form by the end of this month. Again, thank you to those of you who have already submitted it. And contact our team here at Social Finance with any additional questions or if you'd like to discuss the program one-on-one. I'll also note that we'll be holding another webinar on Monday, the 22nd, and I will share the registration link in the chat as well in case you have any colleagues that you'd like to invite to attend on Monday. So with that, I will pause, and we're happy to take any additional questions that people would like to submit versus the chat via the chat or the Q&A function on the Zoom webinar. I see a first question here that Meredith, maybe you can address about whether this program would work for only full-time training programs or if part-time training programs are eligible as well.
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. We are happy to consider both full-time and part-time training programs. We anticipate that there will be a number of programs in both categories. I would say that whether part-time or full-time, our ideal training program length is somewhere in the 3 to 12 month range, although we're also open to considering programs that are a bit shorter or programs that are up to 2 years in duration.
Okay, thank you, Meredith. I see another question here, which is when we're talking about February 2022 for our launch date, what does that mean for providers? Do they need to be prepared to start training students then, or logistically, how will that work for training providers?
Another really good question. So what that means is that in February of 2022, we anticipate going live with the announcements through One Stop Career Centers and through all the other networks that share information with individuals pursuing career and training opportunities in the state of New Jersey. And so beginning in February of 2022, your program's participation would be shared publicly, and we would expect that your program would be ready to begin considering applications for providers who would like, for students who would like to be considered. That said, we recognize that the application and the enrollment process takes some time, and therefore we would not expect that you would be prepared to enroll students necessarily in February. So for example, if the next session of your participating program begins in June of 2022, that would be perfectly fine as long as students could begin engaging with you and begin the application process in February of 2022.
Thank you, Meredith. I see a few logistical questions in the chat that should be easy to address. So first, seeing some questions about whether presentation materials will be shared. I think Meredith had said that we are happy to share the presentation materials. And I also see another question asking whether providers are able to update a data form that they've already submitted. I think that that's not a feature of the data form itself, but if you would like to make any changes, and some folks have already done this, you can certainly email Meredith or myself. My contact information is also in the data form, and we would be happy to update any information that you would like to change. Let me see. I'm seeing some questions about what happens when students drop out or are not able to find a job after the training program is over.
Yep, absolutely. So the way that this will work is that there will be a certain time period. I know there are also some questions about this time period during which students have a repayment obligation for any month when their income is over the minimum income threshold. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, that a student has an obligation to repay their loan over the course of a maximum period of 5 years. Again, we're still setting exactly what that will be, but approximately 5 years. That means that for that student, during the course of those 5 years, let's say that in year 1, they don't have any luck finding a job. But then in year 2, they do secure a position that's over the minimum income threshold. Beginning in year 2, and for as long as they hold that position, they would be responsible for repaying a portion of their discretionary income until they hit the full principal of the loan that they had taken out. In the case that a student never hits that income threshold, unfortunately, the student would have no repayment obligation, and at the end of the repayment period, their full loan principal would be forgiven and their obligation would simply go away.
Okay, thank you. I see some questions asking for a bit more detail about the income threshold related to loan forgiveness and how we're thinking about a sustainable or family sustaining wage.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we're still in conversation surrounding, so I don't want to set one number. We're certainly using factors, including the median income threshold and the poverty lines, to inform this. My guess is that students who are making more than about $40,000 per year will have some sort of a repayment obligation, and that repayment obligation will be tied to a fixed percent of their discretionary income, such that students who are in higher income positions will have more of a repayment obligation than students who are in lower income positions.
Great. I'm also seeing a few questions about the salary threshold for occupations that we can consider. So maybe just to clarify there, kind of how we're thinking about that.
Yeah, so this is the trickiest one of our criteria, because I know there are so many training programs that prepare folks for promising careers that just don't quite hit our minimum salary threshold. And this, again, has been something we've seen already in reviewing the data submissions that we've received. We are, for now, keeping our line at $45,000 per year. Again, there are various ways of converting that into hourly salaries and thinking about what that means in different types of roles. But we are looking for positions that have an average starting salary of $45,000. And I'll just add a little bit more nuance there. We're thinking about that in two ways. One is, as we're considering an occupation, we're thinking about whether the average starting salary per publicly available data is around $45,000. And then as we're looking at specific training programs and asking you to submit your data, we're looking at whether the data for your specific alumni indicate that those alumni who are being placed are earning salaries roughly equivalent to $45,000 per year. So that means that, if the occupation is slightly above or below, we'll also be looking at the data for your specific alumni.
Okay, great. I see a few questions about how exactly the payment to training providers will work. So if you could explain a bit more about how training providers will receive tuition payments for students who are participating.
Sure. So training providers will receive their So let me back up. The Payette Forward Fund is anticipated to be used complementary to other funding sources, right? So students might be able to blend CCOG in the case of community colleges. They might be able to blend ITAs, opportunity grants, so on and so forth. And the goal of the Payette Forward program is to come in as the last dollar resource to complement other funding sources. So that means that perhaps the Payette Forward program would pay $6,000 for a given student toward the cost of attending, if that's the gap that exists between the other funded costs and the total cost of attending. For that student, then, through the Payette Forward program, the training provider would receive the $6,000 directly from the Payette Forward Fund in partnership with our loan origination entity. And then you would simultaneously enroll the student through your standard procedures. If there are other follow-up questions in terms of how that funding flow works, I'm happy to speak to it. But generally, at a high level, the Payette Forward Fund should not have a huge impact on your day-to-day financial operations, since your funds will be provided, again, upfront through the fund.
Okay, great. I see a few questions asking about the idea of having multiple cohorts of students who are participating in the program, and whether providers who are selected in this first round, kind of how long their partnership with the Payette Forward program would last, whether that's anticipated to be for multiple rounds of students or just this first round, and any thoughts that we have there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we anticipate that the period of enrollment will last for the total Payette Forward program at least 5 years. We hope that it will go for more than that, but we anticipate at least 5 years, during which time students will have the opportunity to enroll. The first cohort of providers, again, will be selected in February of 2022, will begin in February 2022, with the ability for additional providers to join over time. We anticipate that the first group of providers will have the opportunity to continue in the program dependent upon student results. So if you haven't gotten this sense yet, everything about this program is really driven by student outcomes. So if you are a provider who's selected and students are completing your programs at high rates, they're getting placed at high rates, and they're earning the salaries that we've discussed, then we see no reason why your program would not continue. That said, on the flip side, if there are performance challenges, we do retain the option to discontinue participation of programs over time. Obviously, that is a process that we would be discussing in detail with you, and would not come as a surprise. But continuing through active performance management is a key part of this program and a key part of the engagement that we expect of providers.
Thank you. I see a few questions here about online classes or remote and hybrid programs, and whether they can be considered for this program.
Absolutely. We are fairly agnostic to methodology as long as the results are strong. I think my run caveat there would be, of course, we take into consideration the occupation for which you're preparing individuals. And if there are particular requirements of, in-person hours, obviously we expect your program to fulfill those requirements. But again, we are open to learning from you about what sort of methodology is most effective for your program and your occupation.
I see a question here about the basic data form and whether providers can submit information for programs that are not currently listed on Etpl, or only programs that are on Etpl at the moment.
Great question. So we are only able to consider providers who have at least one program on Etpl, but we welcome providers who are already in the Etpl database to submit for consideration programs that are not yet listed. The caveat there is that we would need to very quickly get your program listed in Etpl prior to February, but our partners in the Department of Labor are happy to work with us to make that happen for providers who are selected who are already members of the Etpl database.
Great. And one question here is whether this program can pay full tuition. So for example, if a client isn't eligible for an an ITA grant, could this program step in?
Yes, depending upon what that full tuition amount is. We don't yet have an exact maximum, but yes, it is possible for this program to work either alone or in concert with existing funding streams.
Maybe a similar question. We have a question here about whether this program could cover any costs for equipment or books that are required for programs.
Yes. So if there are specific things that are requirements of all students for a given program, for example, the sorts of costs that you would be reporting to Etpl to be listed in the required materials costs, we would then consider those costs to be part of the total cost to attend. We would not consider it to be part of the cost to attend if it's simply that, you know, you're offering an online program, so students need a computer and some students don't have a computer. That would then be something that would fall more in the category of thinking through wraparound supports and how students might use their stipend as opposed to the fixed cost of attending. We define the cost of attending as something that you would list in Etpl as being a part of the price tag for every student who enrolls, regardless of the funding mechanism that that student is using to pay.
Okay, another question we have here is whether different training provider entities can partner with one another. And the example given here is a community college partnering with a four-year college on a training program.
Sure, we'd love to see what you come up with. I think, you know, we would expect certainly the same threshold for demonstration of results. Unfortunately, we're not able to consider programs that are brand new, where we're not able to look at previous data to demonstrate performance. But if you have an existing partnership, or if each entity has previously been operating similar programs that we could use to source the data, we'd be happy to take a look at that partnership and consider that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, I think we've gotten through many of the questions that have been submitted. I do see a few that are asking for some more specifics about how exactly students will apply to participate and receive funding through the New Jersey Pay It Forward program. If you have any detail that you would like to add there, Meredith.
Sure, absolutely. So this is something that we'll be working closely with your respective financial aid offices surrounding. We anticipate that students will learn about the program through many different avenues, including one-stop career centers, all of the career websites that are focused on pathways for opportunity for low-income individuals, community resources, et cetera, And once they learn about the program, we anticipate that they will apply to your institution, perhaps in part because they know that you're participating in the Pay It Forward program. Once they're accepted by your institution for, as a student, they'll then apply in partnership with our loan originator for the Pay It Forward program. The criteria there will be very simple, just surrounding income, basically, so there'll be no huge surprises there. And then once the student is accepted for Pay It Forward, they'll be good to go in terms of this funding source. The same way that your financial aid departments or financial aid counselors currently advise students surrounding their eligibility for ITAs, their eligibility for CCOG, and so forth, we'll make sure that they have the tools and resources to be able to provide detailed guidance surrounding the process for the Pay It Forward loan program.
Great, thank you. And I see a few logistical questions here again about the webinar recording, for example, and yes, we will share that with everyone who's attended and everyone who's registered, and you can feel free to share that with your colleagues as well once we're able to upload the recording of today's webinar. I'm looking through, and at this time, I think we've covered most of the kind of categories of questions that we've received. Maybe one last one is just for any more detail about new programs that don't necessarily have prior data and whether they can be considered.
Yeah, unfortunately for this first round, the answer is no, because so much of what we're going based on is your track record and your history of delivering strong results for students. That said, if you are a new program, we will have future opportunities to join the Pay It Forward program. So for example, if you're enrolling your first cohorts of students now or in 2022, we would then look to the results earned or the results obtained by those students and then consider future participation once you're able to show that sort of track record of success in helping low-income individuals to enter the occupations for which you're offering training. And we'll pause now in case anyone wants to enter in any last questions. I will note that the webinar, our second webinar, will contain the same content as today's webinar, so we certainly invite you to encourage colleagues to participate, but there's no need to join the second webinar if you've already participated in today's conversation. Just pausing for a moment to allow any additional questions that folks would like to put in. While Erin is reading through for additional questions, I just want to note that we will be sending out to all participants the recording of the webinar, the slides from the webinar, and the list of all questions that were discussed during the course of the webinar.
So I do see a few more questions that have to do with ITA funding and whether candidates have to apply for ITA funding before they can apply to participate in the Pay It Forward program. And also a few questions about one-stop centers and whether participants would need to work with one-stop programs or providers would have to work with one-stop programs to participate.
Great questions. In terms of ITAs, if you are offering a program in an in-demand occupation, and if the student is eligible for the ITA, we would hope that they would be able to use the ITA and then use the Pay It Forward program to cover any gaps. If there are specific case-by-case reasons that that is problematic, we're happy to talk with you and with your financial aid officers in greater detail to sort of problem solve and understand exactly what the dynamic is. Of course, along the lines of aiming to expand opportunity, we want to make sure that we are serving as many students as possible and that everyone who should have access does have access. So again, happy to problem solve and think that through with you.
Okay, and maybe a last question. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up now. I just had it. Oh, so how would we verify providers' student outcomes data or otherwise kind of assess the data that providers submit?
Absolutely, a really good question, something that is dear to our hearts. So as basically as Erin outlined within the selection process, in this first phase, we're looking at the data that you submit and we're reviewing that data, and we will then notify providers during the month of December if we think that you might be a good fit, and we'd like to gather additional information to be able to consider you in greater detail. So for this first phase, we're looking at the data you submit. We're also looking at the data that's in Etpl. We're looking at the data that we have from third-party sources, such as exam pass rates, et cetera, and based upon all of that information, we will then go from the full set of interested providers to a subset of providers who may be a good fit. We will notify you if we'd like to continue that selection process with you for this first round, and you'll find out about that during the month of December. For those providers who we then select, we will be asking you to submit to us a number of documents. We will also be asking you to submit directly to the Department of Labor a list of the Social Security numbers of students who have participated in the program, and the Department of Labor will then use their secure system to verify against the wage data, the wages and the occupation of your program alumni. So we're very grateful to the Department of Labor for working closely with us to be able to do this in a way that protects all student confidential data, while at the same time being able to offer third-party verification before we move forward with selection of potential training partners.
So I'm seeing two questions here that seem related. So one is about whether there is a set amount for the maximum cost of training, or whether there's any criteria about kind of a maximum cost of the training on Etpl.
Yeah, it's a good question. So consistent with our first principle of being as student-friendly as possible, we don't think about an absolute maximum, but we will be thinking about the relative cost of training to the relative anticipated salary when an individual completes the program. So that is to say, if a program is significantly more expensive than other programs that we are considering, and therefore would mean that students would have a significantly higher loan obligation to repay, we would then want to see a significantly higher corresponding salary in the occupation for which you're preparing individuals. I know that may not be the most specific or satisfying answer, but this is again something that we're happy to talk with in greater detail on a one-on-one basis as we start to look at your specific program. The one other thing I would say there is, we have a pretty good sense in terms of what median tuition and other costs of attending look like across training programs for different occupations. So if your program is significantly more expensive than the median training program for your occupation, then of course we would be looking for you to justify that in terms of results or in terms of other differentiating factors within your training program.
Thank you, Meredith. It seems like the flow of questions has slowed down a bit. Again, if there's any that we didn't get to, we are planning to send out responses to questions that we received from the webinar. But for now, I think that we've covered most of the topics that people had questions about.
Excellent. Well, thank you to everyone for joining us. We recognize that this is both very exciting, we hope, and also has a lot of novelty. And therefore, we know that there are probably a lot of additional questions and a lot of things that may come to mind as you talk with your colleagues. We do encourage all of you to feel free to reach out directly to myself or to Erin. We have a tool in place so that we can schedule one-on-one conversations with training providers who would like to talk in more detail surrounding your specific circumstances. And we will be in touch with everyone surrounding to follow up from the data forms that you've submitted during the month of December. And in the meantime, we are deeply grateful to you for your engagement and for your interest. And we look forward to learning more about your programs over the weeks to come. Thank you.